Welcome to the introduction to the Facilitator's Guide. In this introduction, we're going to go over some of the general points of what makes a group successful. The main point is, if you make the group safe, you will see God move through people. Okay? And the facilitator is the key to what makes successful groups and makes them safe. Over the years, in getting feedback from the groups that are doing well and successful and seeing changes and the ones who aren't, the main component is the facilitator, and whether you have a strong or a weak facilitator. Now, what makes the facilitator able to make the group successful is that the facilitator isn't too worried about what other people think and if everybody likes them, but you follow the rules and standards. In other words, you don't allow advice and preaching and teaching or even praying for somebody when they have an emotion. Christians like to do that. They like to rescue people. Okay? And also not letting one person dominate the group. One of the results of a group that have a weak facilitator is, people have an interesting group, kind of like a Bible study, but no one really changes. And I think the main sign that the group isn't functioning well and being led well is they don't call each other and keep their weekly commitment with their practical application. Now, a group that has a strong facilitator, you'll see that they're really changing and they're excited. And the more the group changes, the more excited they're going to be. But you have to keep the rules and standards because that's what makes a group safe. Okay? So cutting people off, giving people equal time, staying on track, and no rabbit trails, and especially not letting one person, dominate the group. So some of your challenges as a facilitator will really, first thing is weeding people out of the group who really aren't there to change. But if you stay on track and you follow the rules and standards, they'll kind of weed themselves out. Okay? Now the three components that are most important are, one, using I statements. In other words, when people are talking about themselves, they have to use I statements rather than you or they. Okay? But I think the most important one is the group is only allowed to ask questions. Okay? And those questions are self-discovery type questions. So it's not questions to convict somebody or to make them, feel bad like a lawyer, but the group is really interested in helping the person, see, more insight into their problem. And of course, the third element is you give everybody equal time so no one dominates. The next component is really important with Genesis is we stay in the now. We don't do therapy in group. In other words, if someone says, well, my childhood, I, had these horrible things happen, you would ask, well, how's that affecting you now? By staying in the now, it keeps it safe. Now, what I do in the group is to give everybody equal time. I go around either left to right or right to left. So we, take this person in the group and give them equal time. Because if you just let anybody go who wants to go, the person who has the most to say and wants to dominate will go first, and the person who probably needs to say something, really gets left out. Now, your challenge is going to minimize the discussion, especially theological discussions, and really spend your time on the self-evaluation questions. The goal is always to help each member have a concrete issue for the practical application and the weekly commitment, which means they're going to be calling each other, and calling is much better than emailing, for what their commitment is. Now, the next challenge for all facilitators is people who are in the group who don't do their homework. Well, if they don't do their homework, they can still come to the group and ask self-evaluation questions, but they're not allowed to share the work that they didn't do during the week. So if people continue to don't do their homework, then the group needs to decide whether they really need to be in the group. Or what I like to do is have their weekly commitment that someone in the group will meet with them to do their homework. The next challenge for you always will be problem members, and we'll get to those in a minute. But people who are there for an agenda of some sort rather than to change. Now, I'm going to have some handouts on my website, which is genesisprocess.org. If you scroll over on the left to handouts, there'll be some strategies on how to work with different problem members. As a facilitator, you're going to need to gain some skill at cutting off or trying to challenge problem members. Now, you might have people like the teacher, who's always coming to not to receive, but has an agenda to teach. Or the preacher, someone who's, frustrated, no one gives him a chance to teach, so he comes to these groups in order to preach his agenda. And you might get the Pharisee, who's very judgmental and black and white and is hurting people's feelings, even with their questions. Another problem member might be the poor me. There's someone who's such a black hole of needs that they dominate the group. So let's look at an example of one of these problem members and how you might be able to handle them. Probably the most common one is the teacher. Now, the teacher is someone who comes and has an agenda. Okay? He's not there to receive, but he's there to teach his insights into the Bible. Okay? But the main feature of a teacher is they can't make it personal. So your strategy, of course, is to make it personal, and you start with them, keeping them in the now and using I statements. So some of the questions you might ask a teacher when they start going off is, are you sharing now or are you teaching? Say, can you make that into a question? How is that affecting you and your relationships, what you're talking about? Okay? Can you give me a personal example of what you're talking about? Okay? Or, are you talking about you or me? And when you say, are you talking about you or me, that's a good strategy to get people to use I statements. Another good way to get people to use I statements is just point your eye like this, and that'll get them back on track. As a facilitator, I really encourage you to prepare each week, to watch the videos and take notes in your book of what I'm going to do, which is a facilitator's focus, and my wife is going to take you point by point through the book. And if you prepare each week, you'll see the fruit. And if people are changing, their group will be excited, and they'll do their homework, and they'll be more interactive with each other. Okay? Now, how this is going to work, if each week I'm going to have a facilitator's focus, which will show you what your challenge might be that week for that process, and what's the most important point to spend your time in for the self-evaluations leading to the practical application. Now, my wife, Kathy, is going to be taking you, page by page through the facilitator's guide and showing you how to use it. So I encourage you to take this job of being a facilitator seriously, because if you do, you'll see the fruit, and it'll really be worth it. Okay, I'll see you next week in the introduction to the first process.